Who are the Vietnamese, really? For centuries, the history of Vietnam has been told through ancient legends, dynastic chronicles, and colonial records. But now a completely different tool is peeling back the layers of the past, DNA. And what it reveals may surprise you. The Vietnamese people, like their country, have always stood at a crossroads, where northern empires met southern kingdoms, where mountain tribes met coastal traders. While Vietnamese identity is often tied to language, culture, and resistance against domination, especially Chinese rule, their genetic story tells us something even deeper, a long, rich journey across millennia. Recent breakthroughs in ancient DNA analysis are appending older assumptions. Scientists have discovered that the Vietnamese genome is a tapestry woven from at least 3 major ancestral threads. Some of their ancestors were early rice farmers from southern China who moved south more than 4,000 years ago. Others were indigenous hunter-gatherers who lived in a region for tens of thousands of years. Later still came waves of migration from the north and west, Tai speakers, Han Chinese settlers, and highland groups with Siberian and Tibetan roots. And then there's the Austronesian connection. Traces of ancient seafarers, whose legacy still lingers in central and southern Vietnam. This is more than a story of bloodlines. It's about how identity is shaped through movement, fusion, survival, and reinvention. Today's Vietnamese carry genetic memories from some of the earliest civilizations in Asia, and from countless forgotten peoples whose names were lost to time. So, if you've ever thought of Vietnam as a homogeneous culture with a single origin, get ready to think again. This is the untold story of where the Vietnamese really come from, and how science is helping them rediscover their deep, diverse roots. Long before modern nations or written records, the land that is now Vietnam was home to one of Southeast Asia's most advanced prehistoric cultures, the Dong Son, flourishing around 600 BCE to 200 CE in the Red River Delta. The Dong Son people left behind stunning artifacts, most famously their bronze drums. These massive, intricately decorated drums symbolize power, ritual, and cultural sophistication. And today, they stand as icons of early Vietnamese civilization. But who were the Dong Son people, genetically speaking? Until recently, this question remained unanswered. Archaeological finds revealed their artistry and reach, but not their origins. Now, with ancient DNA testing from Dong Son burial sites, scientists are piecing together the biological legacy of these early Southeast Asians. Genetic studies reveal that the Dong Son were a mixture of early East Asian rice farmers who migrated from southern China and indigenous hunter-gatherers who had lived in the region for tens of thousands of years. This blend created a unique gene pool, which became foundational for much of modern northern Vietnamese ancestry. Interestingly, the Dong Son culture overlaps with the broader expansion of the so-called Austroasiatic language family, to which modern Vietnamese belongs. This connection suggests the Dong Son might have been early Austroasiatic speakers, linking them not just to Vietnam, but also to neighboring cultures in Laos, Cambodia, and even parts of India. The Dong Son drums themselves, found as far afield as Indonesia and southern China, are a testament to the reach and influence of this civilization. Their craftsmanship and symbols speak of a society with elite rulers, long-distance trade, and a sophisticated understanding of ritual and time. Modern Vietnamese people, especially those from the north, still carry the genetic signature of the Dong Son people. But their legacy is more than genetic, it's cultural. The Dong Son drums remain national treasures, and their motifs still inspire Vietnamese art and identity today. So when we speak of Vietnam's origins, we're not just talking about kings and borders. We're talking about bronze, blood, and memory, about a people who built something lasting long before Vietnam was called Vietnam. Modern Vietnamese genetic history is shaped by what scientists call the two-wave theory. This model suggests that today's Vietnamese people descend from 2 major prehistoric migrations, first from Austroasiatic speakers, then from Tai speaking groups. Together, these ancient population movements helped form the genetic and cultural foundation of Vietnam. The first wave, Austroasiatic, likely arrived in the region over 4,000 years ago. These early farmers moved south from what is now southern China, bringing rice agriculture, metallurgy, and complex societies. Their languages eventually branched into forms spoken across much of Southeast Asia, including early forms of Vietnamese. Genetically, they mixed with local hunter-gatherers, producing a hybrid population that would become dominant in the Red River Delta. The second wave, Taikadai, came much later, around 2,000 years ago or less, from areas further north and west. These groups settled mainly in northern and northwestern Vietnam, contributing both language influence and genetic material. Though the Vietnamese language remained Austroasiatic, it absorbed many Taikadai elements in vocabulary, pronunciation, and structure, especially in regions bordering Laos and China. Recent genome-wide studies confirm this two-layer ancestry. Northern Vietnamese populations tend to show more Taikadai influence, while central and southern groups reflect stronger Austroasiatic continuity. This supports both archaeological and linguistic data that point to layered waves of migration, not a single founding group. Together, these two ancestral streams helped create the rich cultural and biological diversity of Vietnam. Rather than a story of conquest or replacement, the genetic record reveals integration and adaptation, echoing the country's long-standing reputation as a crossroads of civilizations. For over 1,000 years, parts of present-day Vietnam were under Chinese imperial rule. From the Han Dynasty's conquest in 111 BCE until Vietnam's full independence in the 10th century CE, northern Vietnam, especially the Red River Delta, was deeply influenced by Chinese political control, migration, and cultural exchange. These centuries left not only linguistic and administrative imprints, but also genetic signatures still traceable in modern Vietnamese populations. Genetic studies show a subtle yet measurable flow of Northern East Asian DNA, especially Han Chinese, into the Vietnamese gene pool during this era. This doesn't suggest widespread colonization or displacement, but rather gradual assimilation through intermarriage, trade, and social mobility. The Han presence in ancient Giao Chi, as northern Vietnam was called, was largely concentrated in administrative centers, where Chinese officials and settlers often integrated with local elites. This integration went both ways. Some Vietnamese elites adopted Chinese customs, Confucian education, and family structures, while Chinese settlers adapted to the local language and landscape. Over time, this created a hybrid identity in the north that blended indigenous Austroasiatic roots with East Asian influences. Genetic data reflects this dual heritage. Vietnamese genomes often show a blend of southern East Asian ancestry and local Southeast Asian lineages. Interestingly, this genetic mixing was not uniform. Northern provinces show higher levels of Chinese influence, while central and southern populations retain more of their Austroasiatic genetic core. This north-south divide mirrors historical patterns of migration, resistance, and integration, and highlights the layered complexity of Vietnamese identity. Beyond genetics, this era also shaped Vietnam's linguistic landscape. Classical Chinese served as the language of administration and scholarship, and Sino-Vietnamese vocabulary remains embedded in modern Vietnamese. Yet the native language survived and evolved, shaped but not erased by centuries of imperial rule. In genetic terms, Chinese rule didn't overwrite Vietnamese ancestry. It enriched it. The legacy of this period lives on not just in monuments and texts, but in the very DNA of millions of Vietnamese people today. Long before modern borders defined Vietnam, its central and southern regions were home to the ancient Kampa civilization. The Cham people of Austronesian origin established a thriving maritime kingdom along the central coast of Vietnam from as early as the 2nd century CE. Their presence and genetic legacy remain crucial to understanding Vietnam's diversity, especially when looking beyond the Han and Austroasiatic threads. Genetically, the Cham carry a distinct Austronesian signature, linking them to populations across island Southeast Asia, such as the Malays, Indonesians, and even Pacific Islanders. Their DNA reflects centuries of maritime migration, trade, and interaction across the Indian Ocean and South China Sea. This makes the Cham unique within Vietnam, a population shaped not by continental migrations alone, but by the sea. Trade routes played a major role in this genetic and cultural exchange. Kampa was a vital node in the Indian Ocean trade network, attracting merchants from India, Persia, Arabia, and beyond. As a result, the Cham gene pool also contains minor South Asian and Middle Eastern components, evidence of intermarriage and integration with traders and settlers over generations. Culturally, the Cham were heavily influenced by Indian religions, art, and script. They practiced Hinduism and later adopted aspects of Mahayana Buddhism. This Indianization didn't just change their temples and texts. It also left echoes in the genetic data. Some Vietnamese today, particularly in central coastal regions, carry minor South Asian ancestry linked to this Cham legacy. Even after Kampa's decline, the Cham people didn't disappear. Many were absorbed into surrounding populations, especially as Vietnamese influence expanded southward during the medieval and early modern periods. Today, the Cham still live in Vietnam, Cambodia, and diaspora communities, preserving their language, religion, and identity. Their story reminds us that Vietnam's genetic heritage is not just a tale of empires and invasions. It's also a maritime story, carried by boats, winds, and ocean currents. The Cham and their Indian Ocean connections remain a vital, living thread in Vietnam's rich genetic tapestry. While the majority kin people form the core of Vietnam's population, nearly 15% of the population is made up of diverse ethnic minorities, many of whom reside in the country's mountainous islands. These communities, from the Hmong and Dao in the north to the Yid and Jarai in the Central Highlands, represent some of the oldest and most genetically distinct populations in Southeast Asia. Their DNA provide a vital window into Vietnam's ancient and complex human story. Genetic research shows that many highland groups descend from early waves of migration into mainland Southeast Asia, with deep ancestral roots stretching back tens of thousands of years. These groups often retain significant portions of deep Asian ancestry, lineages that predate the major agricultural expansions that later reshaped much of the region. This makes their genetic profile notably different from that of lowland Vietnamese populations, who have more East Asian and Austroasiatic influences. Some ethnic minorities, like the Hmong speakers, trace genetic ties to southern China. Others, such as the Austronesian-speaking Yid and Jarai, share ancestry with populations in Indonesia and the Philippines. Still others, like the Tay and Nung, show strong genetic continuity with Tikadai-speaking groups across northern Indochina and southern China. What sets these communities apart is not just their linguistic and cultural diversity, but also the relative preservation of ancient genetic lineages. Geographic isolation in mountainous regions helps shield these populations from the more intense waves of migration and mixing that shape the lowlands. As a result, some highland groups harbor genetic markers that have become rare or absent in more urbanized populations. This distinctiveness has made Vietnam's ethnic minorities a subject of keen interest for geneticists. Their DNA helps reconstruct ancient migration paths, demographic shifts, and even climate adaptations. It also underscores how Vietnam is not a single homogeneous genetic unit, but rather a mosaic of histories and peoples. Importantly, recognizing this diversity goes beyond science. It affirms the cultural and historical significance of these communities, many of whom have faced marginalization. Their DNA, like their traditions, carries a legacy that deserves respect and preservation. Vietnam's genetic story did not end with ancient migrations. The colonial era, beginning in the 19th century, introduced new layers to the population's genetic makeup, subtle but measurable traces of global interaction, conquest, and resistance. During the French colonial period, 1887 to 1954, thousands of administrators, soldiers, traders, and missionaries arrived from Europe, particularly France. While their numbers were small relative to the overall population, genetic studies suggest a modest but detectable European admixture in some urban populations, especially in former colonial centers like Hanoi and Saigon. This European influence, however, is just one thread. The colonial era also saw a surge in global labor movements. Vietnamese workers were sent to French colonies in Africa, and the Caribbean, and soldiers fought in both world wars. Some returned with mixed families or intermarried abroad, creating complex genetic legacies that span continents. In the 20th century, additional migrations, both forced and voluntary, further reshaped Vietnam's gene pool. The war with the United States brought American military presence, and in some cases, biracial children born during and after the conflict. Although many Amerasians later emigrated, some remain part of Vietnam's diverse demographic landscape. The post-war and post-reform Doi Moi eras added new layers through global migration and intermarriage. Vietnamese communities abroad, from Eastern Europe to Australia and the U.S., often maintained cultural ties, but also contributed to the reintroduction of foreign genetic influences when families returned or intermarried. Modern DNA analysis reflects these complex layers. While ancient lineages still dominate, subtle signals from Europe, Africa, and the Americas appear in trace amounts, particularly in cosmopolitan regions. These aren't overwhelming shifts, but they mark Vietnam's participation in a connected world. In the end, Vietnam's genetic narrative is one of deep roots and open branches, a blend of ancient resilience and modern global interaction. The story encoded in Vietnamese DNA is more than a record of ancient migrations or colonial legacies. It's a living reflection of identity shaped by thousands of years of movement, adaptation, and resilience. Far from being a single uniform lineage, modern Vietnamese genetics reveal a layered, dynamic ancestry that spans from the prehistoric Austroasiatic settlers to Tikadai migrants, and includes threads from China, India, France, and beyond. Genetic studies confirm what many historians and linguists have long suspected, that Vietnam is not culturally or genetically monolithic. Northern, central, and southern regions exhibit subtle genetic differences, shaped by geography, trade, and waves of migration. Mountainous highland populations and ethnic minorities preserve unique genetic profiles that speak to isolated evolution and distinct origins, adding even more texture to the national identity. This diversity, however, does not fracture the idea of Vietnamese-ness. It deepens it. DNA shows that Vietnamese identity has always been plural, formed not in isolation, but in the confluence of civilizations. The genetic record tells of a people who have absorbed and adapted influences across millennia, yet maintained a strong cultural coherence. More importantly, this genetic insight challenges simplistic or rigid notions of ethnicity and race. In Vietnam, as in many parts of the world, identity isn't about purity, but continuity. The Vietnamese genome reflects centuries of blending, survival, and reinvention. It suggests that national identity is not diluted by diversity. It's defined by it. As genetic science continues to uncover hidden stories beneath the surface, it reinforces a powerful truth. Vietnam's strength lies not in a single ancestral line, but in its rich, complex web of human history. Through DNA, we don't just understand the past, we gain a deeper, more inclusive sense of who the Vietnamese people are today.